The Wedding of Jay Shanahan by Jason Shannon. This is the author. We decided to elope in a tropical location to get away from it all. We caught the first flight to Bogota, high up in the mountains. The flight touched down at El Dorado International Airport, and we caught a Chinese-made Yutong tour bus through the crowded city streets heading south, out of the city, into the green slopes of Colombia's interior. Our hotel was a jungle resort south of the city, remote and secluded. Victoria had found it in the back pages of a Transat tourism brochure, small font, only a single picture of the resort lodge with high peaks in the background. The bus cut down a sprawl of side streets and dirt roads. We arrived at the Montaña del Paraíso, dropped our bags in the room, and immediately proceeded to the bar. Next to a kidney-shaped pool, the misty green mountains in the background, I sipped a caipirinha, while my lover took a healthy pull from her Pegu club. We had not told anyone of our impending nuptials. A few friends could probably guess the purpose of this trip, as I'd mentioned years before I might do something like this, but otherwise we told no one. My own parents had eloped in a secret ceremony nearly 40 years before, 4 days before Christmas, with just 2 friends as witnesses and a justice of the peace. Their wedding license had been presented as a gift to their parents 4 days later. I wanted to do the same thing, only no justice of the peace, no witnesses, no license. Victoria's parents were quite religious, strict Catholics living in Lethbridge. When she Zoom called with them, she had to pretend like she and I weren't living together in sin, and even had a special alcove in the back room where she'd make her calls to keep up the ruse. She had a cousin run for MPP on a platform of banning LGBTQ+ topics in education, a sister who protested outside a Calgary Women's Health Center at least once a month, and an uncle who's a doomsday preacher living on a commune outside of Fox Creek. She did not fancy the idea of those people witnessing and forming false perceptions of her most intimate moment. On the day of the wedding, we dressed in simple hiking clothes, packed a bag each, and left the resort at the crack of dawn. I had my handwritten vows folded up and tucked into one of the pockets of my backpack. We caught a cab across the small barrio, down a dirt road, and then rented a couple of donkeys to trek up the steep slopes. At a plateau about 40 minutes up, we stopped at a gazebo. I tipped the muleteer well, and he told me, in poor English, that he'd wait as long as we wanted. We trekked on foot a little farther up, and came upon a perch on the side of the mountain. The steep green slopes of the Cordillera Oriental stretched out before us, mists filling the valleys below. "This is it," said Victoria, smiling. We were utterly alone. There was no one here except the muleteer 15 minutes down the rocky path at the concrete gazebo. Victoria ducked in behind a mossy rock on the side of the mountain, taking her backpack with her. She said, "No peeking. You can't see the bride before the ceremony itself." I took my own bag and took a few steps in the other direction. I slipped out of my t-shirt and khakis, stripping down to my underwear right there on the mountainside. I changed into black dress slacks and a white button-down shirt, black tie, cufflinks. I reapplied my deodorant. Buttoning up the last of my buttons, I brought out my cell phone. There was no signal up here, yet I only needed the camera to check my hair. Coming back to the cliffside viewing spot, I stood and admired the scenery while I waited for my fiancé. "Well, aren't you handsome?" I turned around. Victoria wore a light purple sundress, spaghetti straps over the shoulders, a loose skirt to the knees, a little cleavage. Her hair was down. "Arr," I said in a mock pirate accent. "Ye be bootiful, lass." I stepped in and kissed her, my hand snaking around and pulling her close to me. She said, "You're not supposed to kiss the bride until the end." By whose rules, baby? Good point, she said with a smile and kissed me again. Eventually, we separated ourselves. She went up to the edge, a cliff face falling below her. She said, "You stand here." She took up a position opposite me, took my hands in her own. She began. She did not have anything prepared in written form. She was going off memory, trying not to tear up. I didn't interrupt her. When my turn came, I pulled out a folded piece of paper out of my pocket. I had a speech prepared. It was poetically written, flowy yet clear. I began, "My beloved," but we were not alone. About halfway through my vows, I heard someone coming. They were running up the path with great speed. I thought for a second it might be the muleteer, rushing to tell us of a mudslide or some other natural disaster. Yet when I turned, it was Andy, my best friend. My friend who should still be in Golden Lake, Ontario. Had he tailed us here? We hadn't told anyone about Colombia. Certainly hadn't told anyone about this particular spot in the mountains. Andy was disguised as a shrub. He wore gray-green camo, with branches and leaves pasted to his body, his face and his shaved head painted with the same camouflage pattern. He had a briefcase in his hand. Running, panting hard, he bellowed, "I've got money in the bank! I've got money in the bank!" Money in the bank? Isn't that... It was a WWE move. To swoop in at the last minute and steal the title. "I've got money in the bank! I challenge this union!" I sighed heavily. Victoria swung her head around, hung it low and shook it, unamused. He kept charging towards us on the uneven path. "I've got money in the..." He shook the briefcase. His face pausing for a second, he suddenly changed his tune and proclaimed, "I've got funny pages in the briefcase! I've got funny pages in the brief..." He tripped on a wet rock, stumbling forward. His legs came out from under him, his arms came up. The briefcase went flying, tumbling forward and bursting open on another rock. Sheets of printer paper came funneling out in a cloud. One whooshed forward in a draft and pinned itself directly against my face. I pulled it off myself. Reading from it, I said, "And the werewolf came out of the woods and took over the dance floor." Back in high school, I had been the scribe, writing down every funny one-liner, moment, or humorous tale that our group of friends had. Most of it now is garbled gibberish, unable to be read for lack of context. But back in the day, it was a brick of a manuscript, consisting of thousands of individual one-liners. Our group of friends referred to it as the funny pages. Andy, scrabbling to his feet, took a breath and said, "I've got funny pages in the briefcase, and I challenge this union!" It's as if our non-existent priest just put out the offer to speak now or forever hold your peace. Victoria rolled her eyes. Andy then reached into his pocket and pulled something out. He got down on one knee and opened the ring box. Inside was a silver cock ring, the Stag Shop label still looped around the band. Victoria said, "I told you not to tell him we were going to Colombia." "I didn't," I said. "He should be crashing a non-existent wedding in Yellowknife right now." Andy said, Then all hell broke loose. The bushes erupted with more than a dozen men in camouflage. They burst out of ditches, from behind bushes, from defiles in the rock. Two of them came right over the cliff edge, springing up like Tibetan Special Frontier Commandos. They all had painted faces, camo berets, green and gray military-style uniforms, tightly laced boots. And they were all armed with AK-47s, aimed and ready, their eyes staring down the barrel at the sights. All three of us froze. I think my hands went up slowly. A man came forward, lowering his AK-47. In a thick Spanish accent, he said, "What is all this ruckus? Do you have money in the bank? Where is money? It will be your ransom, gringo." "Oh, shit," I whispered. This interruption wasn't some elaborate prank of Andy's. They were the FARC. The Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia. Communist guerrillas. The guy who spoke English saw my vows in my raised hand. He snatched the paper away violently. "Love, partner, give my life to this union. Mierda, is this a wedding?" "Si," Victoria babbled through clattering teeth. The guy next turned to Andy, who still had the cock ring in his hand. "And you are puto here to crash ceremony?" Said Andy. One of the other armed men barked something in Spanish to the guy speaking English. The guy speaking English said, "Okay, all of you, come with us, rapidamente. We take you into jungle. Then we send picture of you with today's newspaper and puto's bank arranged transfer. See." The next thing I knew, my hands were being twisted behind my back and zip ties were being cinched around my wrists. We were force-marched for 4 hours without rest. Dense jungles, steep slopes, misty valleys, chilly high altitudes. I think they marched us clean over the mountain. The guy who spoke English was named Juarez. Early on, there had been a lot of chatter between him and the others in Spanish. I didn't speak Spanish. Andy didn't speak Spanish. Victoria spoke very little. After a time, Juarez came back and explained the situation. He apologized to Victoria and I about crashing the wedding. "A marriage is a momentous occasion. We would not have barged in if we realized. Instead, just followed Puto here as he left in disgrace and disappeared him then. But we did not know. Señorita was not wearing white dress. And there was no one in attendance. And no padre. We thought you were just gringo backpackers. Do not fear, we will make it up to you. When we arrive in camp, we will throw you a lavish wedding. Beautiful white dress, sacred vows, big dancing reception. Our Minister of Intimacy will preside over the ceremony." The Minister of Intimacy. Great. Juarez left it unspoken, but Victoria spoke enough Spanish from her month-long trek to Mexico City during the Day of the Dead festival when she was 21 to know the prospects were not so bright for Andy. They continuously used a homophobic slur to refer to him. He had been challenging the wedding, seemingly to win my hand, and he had a cock ring in a jewelry box, and a tattoo of a squid on his forearm that, from the right angle, looked like a huge boner. From what Victoria could glean, he was being judged for being a sexual deviant, for breaking up this holy union with his puto agenda, and for being a self-centered egotist concerned with getting his rocks off at the expense of, or to the detriment of, civil society, or some other such homophobic nonsense. This, despite the fact that Andy is himself married to a woman, a ceremony, I might add, that I did not crash. "They say they're going to," Victoria whispered, squinting and concentrating on the Spanish conversation ahead of us. "I don't know what the word gulago means." "What is she saying?" Andy whispered from behind me. "She says you're being unpersoned." Noon came and went, and some hours later we arrived at their camp. It was in a jungle, with barracks and lean-tos and small cabins all camouflaged under a canopy of green. Weathered-faced workers hacked machetes at plants in the field, while more guerrillas oversaw the operation while cradling their rifles. You could tell who the field workers were and who the supervisors were. The workers were indigenous, I realized, some remote group up here in the mountains, probably living their own lives until these Spaniards came marching in, proclaiming their liberation from European colonizers via the ideology of the European Karl Marx. Then I realized what they were farming. It was coca leaves. Cocaine. The FARC didn't just get its money from wealthy gringos, it seemed. As it turned out, the Minister of Intimacy had recently been purged. Great, I thought. We won't have to read vows in front of a bunch of gorillas. We'll just go straight to the coca fields. Except for Andy, who will probably suffer the same fate as the late minister. But no, it turns out the Minister of the Economy was promoted. He's the new Minister of Intimacy. He's actually running both departments for the time being. One of the gorillas in the camp directed Juarez and us to the new guy, who was knelt down showing some poor farmer how to tell when the coca was ready to be harvested. When he heard his name, he turned. I saw the profile of his face. I saw the mustache. My God, I whispered to Victoria. That guy looks like Pablo Escobar. That's rather racist, she replied. Not every Colombian looks like... But before she could finish, the man turned to face us and stood up. His left eye was gone, and the left side of his skull was blown away. In fact, now that I was looking at it, he had a pallid complexion. On second thought, I think he is Pablo Escobar, she murmured. The FARC had reanimated his corpse somehow. He wore faded light blue 90s jeans. He sported a bushy mustache. His hair, minus the part blown away at the exposed flesh wound on the left side of his skull, was black and wavy. All three of us stood there slack-jawed. Juarez said, "This is a special day for you, no? You chose today for a reason? Do not worry, amigos. This evening you will be wed. Pablo, listen to me. At sunset, we do a wedding. Wedding, comprende? Come, señorita, the women will help you with the proper wedding gown. See." Then hands appeared on Victoria's arm, and she was being pulled away. She snorted, "Hey!" and I stepped forward to grab hold of the other arm like a tug of war. But one of Juarez's men rapidly stepped forward and rammed the butt of his rifle into my gut. I doubled over and collapsed to a knee. I heard Victoria whimper, probably from seeing me struck. Then she was inside one of the shacks. I gradually got to my feet. Andy said, "You know..." I snorted. "Unless your cock ring is a magical James Bondian gadget that can get us out of here by blowing all the mines you've placed, I don't want to hear it." Andy was put to work digging a latrine. Since he was a sexual deviant, he'd almost certainly be sent into the high mountains to mine minerals until he died. But they needed to run the show trial first. In the meantime, they gave him an unsavory job at the camp, while his ankle was chained to a boulder with a heavy logging chain. I was given some plantain chips for lunch, and then put with a group of indigenous farmers who were cultivating coca leaves. They didn't speak English. I don't even know if they spoke Spanish. They communicated by gestures, showing me where to plant, how deep to dig. Before I barely got started, I was pulled away and brought into a private shack. Juarez was there, as was zombie Pablo Escobar. The drug lord was shirtless and lying on a wooden table. Bullet holes were scattered across his torso. Juarez said, "Minister Escobar wishes to speak to you regarding the statements you wrote." "My vows? Does that pass for vows in Gringostan? Anyway, he'll just be a minute. For now, try this shirt on. It's mine. I think it will fit you." I had no choice but to strip to the waist. He presented me with a jungle green camouflage Mao jacket. I buttoned it up. It fit. As I was buttoning it up, a smoking middle-30s woman injected Pablo with something. He had some sort of cancer chemo port on his chest, and she looked to be inserting a very large needle directly into his heart. He twitched and roused a bit. Next, the woman brought out a car battery and set it on the table. Hooking booster cables to it, she then connected Pablo's right index finger and his left, being careful to stand back when she clamped on the latter. His body twitched and spasmed violently. She stood back and watched. Juarez didn't even seem to notice. Instead, he handed me a pair of pants with the same camel pattern as the jacket. At last, the woman disconnected the battery, and the corpse of Pablo Escobar sat upright on the table immediately. It blinked, shook its head. The woman offered him a shirt. Coming back to himself, Escobar buttoned up the shirt, then turned his gaze to me. "Senor Shanahan." He ran through the plans. Weddings were not his usual duty. He was Minister of the Economy. I came to realize that he was there to maximize coca output. But he was committed to a glorious, one-of-a-kind wedding. That he would certainly accomplish, I thought. He tore up my vows. They were nonsense, he proclaimed. Nothing in there but a covenant with God. Nothing in there about love and family blessed by the community. "You gringos have no connection to the past, no heritage. Everything is me, me, me. No concern for family. No concern for community. No concern for wider society," said the world's most notorious drug lord. Juarez left me and Escobar to plan the impromptu revolutionary wedding. "Do not worry, it will be simple. Senorita will be walked down aisle, given away, we say vows, then dinner and dancing." His English was quite good. I asked him, "Mr. Escobar, how exactly—" "Cadre Escobar, por favor," he insisted. I got the hint. He was not to be questioned. We went through a simple timetable for the evening, and then zombie Pablo Escobar attempted to teach me how to tango. This was my wedding. 24 armed revolutionaries, 10 or 15 indigenous coca farmers, 1 convicted unperson, and an undead drug kingpin were there to witness this most special and intimate of moments. I stood at the makeshift altar. It was outdoors, the sun dipping towards the west. There was a small gazebo behind Escobar, the sun tinting orange in the valley beyond. A statue of the Virgin Mary was there as well. Revolutionaries sat on cheap wooden chairs and crates. I was dressed in a green camo Mao suit. At the other end, Victoria appeared. She was wearing a semi-traditional wedding dress, a long flowing gown with sleeves to the wrists. The neckline wasn't frumpy, but neither was it all that sexy. The dress and the veil were green, gray, and white camouflage. Juarez, in another Mao suit, was at her side, ready to walk her down the aisle and give her away. Andy was there too, probably to keep an eye on him. His wrists were still bound, and he had a guard posted to him. As Juarez began to walk my partner down the makeshift aisle, Andy fumbled with both hands in his pocket. They must have left him with his cell phone. It wouldn't do him any good out here, he'd have absolutely no signal. He pulled it out, fumbled with it. It began playing a song, Salty Dick's Whores of Sailortown. I looked over his way. He had a great big greasy smirk on his face. Victoria arrived at the altar. Juarez passed her off. With prodding from Escobar, I lifted the green veil. She looked just as bemused as I. Zomblo Escobar said, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." He read through the standard script. The standard script. There were nods in there to Catholicism, platitudes about commitment and celebration, and a sprinkling of communistic jargon. On it went. He said to me, "Did you promise to have and to hold Senorita Scaife for as long as you both shall live?" Seeing his pallid complexion, I wondered if death was the cutoff. He continued, "In sickness and in health, for better or for worse, in richness or in poorness. Although, parenthetically, I should add that in richness both of you would be getting the firing squad." I sputtered, now? Do I say I do?
Si,
I do.
and you, señorita, do you take?
She replied in the same tone.
And did you promise to fight valiantly, side by side, por la revolucion?
I do, we both said in turn.
Do you pledge to be fruitful and multiply, bringing joy into each other's lives, and new revolucionarios into the movement?
I had myself sterilized 11 years ago. Perhaps I shouldn't mention that. I do.
Did you promise to open your union to criticism and struggle sessions within the Comunidad Revolucionario?
Victoria and I met each other's gazes. She was sighing with her eyes. I do. Zomblo Escobar smiled and clapped both of us on the shoulder.
Then, by the power vested in me,
I saw something around his neck. Previously tucked into his jacket, it was now jostling about freely. A small cylinder on a chain.
by the Comunidad Revolucionario de las Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, Ejército del Pueblo.
It was a dog whistle.
I now pronounce you Señor and Señora. You may now kiss the bride.
Thinking quickly, I smirked a little to Victoria. Then I leaned in to kiss her, and at the same moment reached out and snatched the dog whistle from around Escobar's neck and yanked it. My lips touched Victoria's, but then I quickly pulled away and, bringing the whistle to my mouth, blew until my face turned purple. No sound was made. Escobar stumbled backwards and looked at me cockeyed. Juarez grabbed his AK-47, unsure of what was happening. All was quiet for a long moment. No one moved. The wind rustled through the trees. Zomblo Escobar said,
Señor, when we convene for our next struggle session, I'm afraid I'm going to have to draw attention to...
The ground shook. A tremendous thumping echoed through the trees. Juarez now whirled around, thinking Bogota and the CIA were doing a bombing run. Every other revolutionary here likewise was on edge, many grabbing their rifles as well. A fearsome cry sounded through the jungle. It was a mix of a cow's moo, a pig's oink, and a lion's growl. The thumping was getting closer, as though King Kong were charging up upon us. A 4,000-pound hippopotamus came rampaging out of the jungle. It was surprisingly fast, blitzing its way through a clearing and steamrolling a makeshift table where coca leaves were being bundled. It bellowed again, its call a furious howl.
Dios mío!
I heard Juarez hiss before opening fire. Zomblo Escobar said,
Ah, Bessie, where have you been?
I grabbed Victoria by the wrist and yanked hard enough that it would have dislocated her shoulder had she not already been running. This was the most dangerous land animal on Earth. We had to get the hell out of here. Another hippo came charging out of the woods. A revolutionary nearly dropped his rifle and ran. I heard Juarez scream and looked over to see him on the ground. His leg was trampled and pulverized. Soon the rest of him was, too. I dashed to Andy, who was crouching behind some crates with all the gunfire going off. A little shaken, he said, You know, I've still got funny pages in the briefcase. Actually, you don't. They were burned for being counter-revolutionary, and the briefcase is loaded up with a shit ton of cocaine. Cadre Escobar was feasting ravenously on the pulped innards of a trampled revolutionary. Come on, I urged. Let's get the hell out of here. Keeping low, we scurried for the tree line. Gunfire erupted overhead. The roaring bellow of a hippopotamus sounded. One of the lean-to shacks these guys had erected collapsed like so many dominoes. With our camo outfits, we fled into the jungle. "3 days later, Victoria and I were back at the resort in the barrio south of Bogota. We'd had to answer a lot of questions with the Colombian National Police. Someone named John Smith in a suit and tie, who I'm pretty sure worked for the CIA, had been there as well. Even now, I was pretty sure we were under surveillance from a vigilante within a Colombian right-wing paramilitary force. There was a van parked out front the resort, and the driver just sat there, behind the wheel, with a pair of binoculars. After a long night's sleep, I awoke early and went down to the buffet, and ordered a tequila sunrise from the bartender in the corner. Walking back around the pool, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, sitting in a lounge chair, a little red from sunburn, was Bryant, my friend from Oshawa. Noticing me, he did a double take. Then he raised his rum and coke in a salute. "Hola," he said cheerily. "How was the honeymoon?" I stepped up next to his lounge chair. "What are you—" Before I could finish, Andy came strolling out of the bar on the far side of the pool. He was carrying a couple of martini glasses. To Bryant, he said, "They didn't have any cherry Smirnoff, so—" "Oh, hey." "This resort," I gawked. "You're staying at this resort." He looked sheepish. "Well, this is awkward." I grumbled and rubbed my temples. Suddenly, I felt Victoria's hand on my back. I turned. She was wearing a skimpy purple bikini, sunglasses in her hair, a towel over one arm. "Andy," she said standoffishly. She swung her gaze to Bryant. "Bryant, nice to see you're enjoying the sun." I told her, "Pack your bags. We're catching the first flight out of Bogota this afternoon. We'll finish what we started in—" I almost spat out the name of some other country, but I didn't want Andy to follow us there with another briefcase full of funny pages. Where could we go? The Tiger's Nest Monastery in Bhutan? Eric's Fjord? The isolated hills of the Kerguelen Islands? Perhaps a research station on the Antarctic Peninsula. "You know, you are technically married," said Andy. "Yes, we were pronounced Senor and Senora. We are technically married, although that particular asterisk isn't the one I'd wish to have stamped onto my partnership." A glass shattered in the buffet behind me. It sounded like a waiter dropped his tray. I turned. Dressed in camo gear, with fake insignia on the shoulder and above the breast pocket, the right-wing paramilitary commando from the van out front came marching up with 3 of his buddies. They all had pistols mounted on their belts.
"Senor Shanahan,"
the lead guy said urgently,
"we need you to come with us at once. Your expertise with black magic is required."
All 4 of the vigilantes crossed themselves at the words, "black magic." He grabbed me by the shoulder to persuade me of his seriousness.
"A merman Laurence de Graff has just washed up on the beach south of Cartagena. Come, rapidamente."
Before he could pull me by the arm, he noticed Victoria, lithe and barefoot and sporting nothing but a small purple bikini. To me he said,
"Did you let your wife go out semi-naked in public like this?"
"She's not my wife," I grumbled. This concludes the reading of The Wedding of Jay Shanahan by Jason Shannon. Rarely can an author pinpoint the exact moment a story popped into their mind. Oftentimes, characters, plot points, or ideas develop gradually, or at separate times, and come together slowly. In this instance, not only do I know the exact time and place when this story came into being, but the moment was caught on tape. On November 26, 2022, while chilling in a hot tub late at night with some friends, a little too inebriated on Gdanski Spiritus 76, the story came spilling out. My friend recorded a voice memo for my notes, which I'll include here.
It's recording now. What's the story?
Jay's wedding in Colombia, Andrew parachutes in to crash the ceremony and be like, anyone who has reason to speak, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. And he comes running out of the jungle dressed as a bush, but is ambushed by, like, the FARC and is thrown in a gay gulag.
Yeah, because I was going to do, WWE. Money out of money. I have fucking, what is it called? Like, money in the bank. You
with
fucking
the funny
idiot.
pages in a briefcase.
Yeah. So, like, instead of money in the bank, it's like the funny pages in a briefcase. And I'm like, I challenge this wedding because I want to put a cock ring on Jason Shannon or some shit.
Of course, I'm naked and erect.
At his wedding.
At my wedding.
I can hear this, and she's like, by the way, when we go to Colombia to get married, Andrew's not invited. And that's the whole point, is that Andrew, out of the jungle with a briefcase, money in the bank, funny pages in the bank, I declare whatever, but then we can't even enjoy the shenanigans because the ghost of Pablo Escobar
And his hippopotamus.
and his ghost hippopotamuses.
Hippopotami.
Somehow, this is where my fucking nonsense.
I'll carry on from there in written form.
He's the author. I'm the mule of shenanigans. I'm the baby.
And she's the hippopotamus.
That was rude. I'm the hippopotamus.
You're Pablo Escobar.
Hippopotamus.
Still recording?
I've been called. Yes. I've sucked off worse.
Let that be a case study for anyone who petitions an author on where they get their ideas. I'm not sure exactly how close to the mark I wound up getting. Jay Shanahan is a fictional character I've been playing around with for a little while now. If you want more of him, check out the story The Funeral of Andy Buttons. I'm also working on a novel titled Viva la Winter. Both the story and the first chapter of the novel are available at www.jasonmshannon.com. If you enjoyed this story, I'd encourage you to check out my books. I have 4 novels available. The Zimmer Insurgency, a fast-paced sci-fi political thriller which takes place over the course of 22 hours. The Hounds of Harrigan, a 1,200-page post-apocalyptic epic of global conquest under a neo-Mongol empire. The Moon Panther, a collection of 4 novellas in a dystopian Australia, featuring femme fatale assassins, a Machiavellian concubine, and ruthless desert bandits. And Rain's Agenda, wherein our narrator makes a startling discovery about female liberation in a time on the brink of World War IV. Go to www.jasonmshannon.com for free excerpts and links to buy. Music by Julie Beats via looperman.com. Text copyright 2022 by Jason Shannon. Production copyright 2022 by Jason Shannon. All rights reserved. No part of this recording may be played for an audience or reproduced in any form. It may not be streamed, downloaded, broadcast, or copied without prior written consent from the author. Address all inquiries to jm1shannon@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.